Tried to read Mrs. Dalloway when I was younger and found it quite difficult, but then when I read A Room of One's Own,
passed away. Mrs. Lincoln and others, those who knew him well, understood that he had no fear of death.
One day, the kids in the neighborhood say, "Hey, guess what? Mrs. Hicks is out on the highway naked with a salad bowl on her head. Come on."
And she addressed them all as, Mrs. Dubo, Mrs. Tartar, Mrs. Silver, Mrs. Cooper, Mrs. Teitelbaum, even though they were discussing.
For word. No, Mrs. Lopez. Great. In the
cases, we have a little lady named Mrs. McAllister who was brutally raped and murdered up in.
Hey guys, sorry I'm late. The traffic was horrible. Who are you? I'm the defense attorney for Miss Matthews. Just give us a minute.
Mrs. Butterworth?
Yes?
Tell me, what's the secret?
She wasn't called Mrs. MacArthur back then. She was Patricia. What?
Ambassador Rice, Secretary Powell, and Mrs. Powell, family members.
Crowd named Mrs. Powell says to Franklin, what form of government have you given us? And Franklin.
Prince George resented having to put aside Mrs. Fitzherbert, whom he had married in secret.
He goes.
My mother got that MRS degree.
Yes.
The 2 years.
the Birdcage and Mrs. Doubtfire in that order, or in your order.
In my order?
Yeah.
And prepare for our final and most precious pose.